Well, I will do the presentation. This is a collaboration with Alex and Barbara from GE and Pyramel respectively, and they will also help me in the Q&A. Could I have the next slide, please? So to start off with, where does this project come from? Actually, the problem statement is that today our diagnostic accuracy of Alzheimer's disease is definitely not optimal. It's largely based on clinical phenotypes and by exclusion of other pathologies. And that, of course, leads to a number of problems in the field. First one being that an uncertainty around diagnosis may lead to poor management, reduced treatment effectiveness, and less than optimal outcomes. And for instance, also continues to contribute to the idea that cognitive loss is a normal part of aging, which definitely is something that we need to break through. Furthermore, and that is something that I personally have felt the consequences of, is that it also hampers new treatment development. With in trials, that if you look at the data, up to 25% of individuals in treatment trials for Alzheimer's dementia do not seem to have amyloid in the brain, and therefore dilute any efficacy signal. And if you then wait for clinical symptomatology to come in, that gives you a more diagnostic certainty because of certain features of the cognitive loss. We might actually be too late in the disease process to, with our current interventions or treatments in trials, to change the course of disease. So I think these two parts, increase our diagnostic certainty in the field management, as well as our ability to ensure that our trial subjects are having the pathology that we're trying to treat are key situations we need to and want to improve on. Next slide. Now, why does this need a public-private partnership? Because of this needs to bring together both access to the right subjects with the proper clinical characterization, access to technology with traces like flutamidamol and florbetaben, and then engagement with other stakeholders such as regulators and HTAs, Health Technology Assessment Offices. It is clearly something that not one single group of stakeholders would actually be in a position to do. But bringing together academic researchers and treating clinicians, the health authorities and reimbursement authorities, patients and disease associations is also a key participant here. And then industry, both from a interventional as well as a diagnostic angle, is essential for this project to succeed, because none of us would be able to do this on our own. Next slide. So what are the objectives if we try to write this out more in longhand? And one key feature, I think, is that we want to make sure so that we are as efficient as possible and don't reinvent the wheel where it's not necessary. So we would envision that we would start from existing Europe-wide clinical and imaging networks that already have experience in doing multi-center trials with imaging tools, and that we would try to find a large number of subjects that we can put through the testing paradigm and really establish the value of knowing what the amyloid status is by imaging, and how that affects in the real world how people are managed. And the second objective is then understanding the use of amyloid imaging to improve clinical outcomes by enriching for and get away from that high admixture of non-AD pathology in our trials that we currently have, so that we will be able to show a positive treatment effect with higher certainty and also a lower risk of failing, just because our populations were not clean enough. Achieving both of these should ultimately lead to treatment and care improvements and the pathways associated with that, and would significantly increase the value by avoiding unnecessary resource expenditure and patients not being treated for what they actually have in the clinical research for dementia. Thinking about this and what the level of data is we would need, probably the enrichment part is going to be a bit a bigger part of the pie of the two objectives. Could I have 2 clicks, please, Alessandra? So moving forward, these 2 objectives we describe under 2 headings. First one being the amyloid diagnostic and patient management study, and you see it coming later, more sub-goals for that one, and then the amyloid enrichment study. Next slide. So of the full project, talking about the amyloid diagnostic and patient management study, just trying to give a bit more flavor of what it is we're looking for. So understanding the utility and the real-world utility of beta amyloid imaging in the context of other available data that you have on the subjects, whether it's other biomarkers, other diagnostic tests you've done in your current clinical practice, and then how now knowing formally that there is a positive or sometimes even more important, a negative amyloid scan, how does that then translate in you treating the subject differently and collect some real-world evidence around that. And so that's more about what does it do for you in clinical practice, whether in academia or in a more private setting. The amyloid enrichment study is what we're trying to get at. There is a level of course, increased accuracy of diagnosis then with a positive scan, and then you, of course, wouldn't enroll negatives necessarily, although there are certain study paradigms under which you would want an amyloid negative arm to go along, and how that then reflects itself in a better signal-to-noise ratio of your intervention. And what can we really learn also about progression of the disease. Of course, we have had ADNI that learned us a lot about the disease progression, but right now that's largely models. We would be contributing to a larger data set here that may over time show us really maybe different courses for different types of clinical phenotypes and really contribute to a better understanding of disease progression. Next slide. So, as I already stated, this is really have to be a joint effort of pharma, diagnostic, and imaging industry with all other relevant stakeholders. And again, I'll want to emphasize that we do clearly also see patient/disease-oriented organizations to be part of this, aside, of course, from academic centers, networks, and clinical sites. We strongly believe that the data generated by this, both in real-world utility as well as in clinical trial optimization, will be of broad value and will, of course, contribute not just to a European but to a global data set that will help us improve our management of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Next slide. And how will it do that? Well, that can help us to start thinking about what is in fact the best window for intervention, what are the best subjects for certain types of interventions, and how that then ultimately influence treatment regimens and outcomes. One of the challenges that we are going to be facing in going in earlier populations is, okay, so what's the impact on function down the line? Can it even be discerned? And of course, from a health technology assessment point of view, that is critical information. If you can bridge from, a pure cognitive benefit to down the line a better functional outcome is something that is material, and maybe knowledge of amyloid status is one of the parts in that model that kind of makes a pathway go upward. Next slide. So, and I'm not going to read this whole slide as you've heard. The slides will be made available, but we are targeting here a population of individuals for both parts, in fact, that spans from what one could call symptomatic at risk or subjective memory complaints, so the early preclinical, all the way to mild cognitive impairment due to AD, also called prodromal AD, as an initial basket of subjects. And of course, over the course of the study, some of these will progress to mild dementia, and then we can compare the trajectories with or without knowledge on amyloid status, for example. The endpoints that here are laid out are what we could have come up with, but of course we look forward to the greater knowledge around this call to come up with other ones that help us identify, knowing or not knowing the status in the current or future healthcare environments. How does it affect your ability to manage these subjects better? And that's, of course, we say demonstrate clinical utility, so we look forward also to getting from you ideas as to how to do that. So that's for the first part of the first study, sub-studies, if you will. Next slide. And this is, again, kind of further trying to kind of codify the goals, the deliverables, where if you would have either you would or you wouldn't have a scan and you have a certain set of other information available, again, how does that affect an outcome down the line? And how does, for instance, having the confirmation with a positive scan affects the way you approach both the subject, his family, and how that can impact outcomes versus you're agnostic to the amyloid status, therefore have a higher diagnostic uncertainty, and does your approach to the subject and family differ? And I already talked about increasing the understanding of the natural history, especially also in those that come with complaints but have a negative scan or a borderline, and what happens down the line, is there further subdivision possible? Next. In terms of the amyloid enrichment study, given it is a study and de facto is something that then will entail interventions, this is where, of course, having experience with multi-center trials with the ability to conduct real clinical study with outcomes clinically, as well as follow-ups with second PET scan or other biomarkers, of course, would strengthen the candidacy. And of course, the other part is having access to a cohort of subjects that is already, lined up to be evaluated and either confirmed for presence or absence of amyloid in the brain with the scans. We have, again, indicative. All the numbers, by the way, we're talking about are indicative. Put a number out there, but the idea is that having access to subjects that you already know clinically, of course, should improve your ability to show differentiation of amyloid status, presence, absence, and so forth. Next slide. As I already said, having more access to more than one biomarker, of course, would allow us to further tease out the Clifford-Jack model and whether that actually holds up. So having a cohort that has access to, for instance, amyloid status in CSF, and our ability to compare that with the PET scan and also maybe even over time is something that is clearly of high interest to us. Another part that is interesting is regionally differential accumulation rates and whether that tells us something. So your ability to do studies that kind of incorporate that is of value. And of course, what is the best population for trials and the best timing for intervention is one of the outcomes, at least one of the partners here is looking forward to, because today our funnels for identifying subjects that are right for the treatment we want to give them are still by and large very inefficient, and they require huge numbers, often factors of 15 to 1 or higher to, and so knowing better what the impact can be of a scan on narrowing that funnel is going to be of value, because that, of course, will drive us to say, okay, maybe the scan has a higher cost, both in terms of resource as well as in invasiveness. But if it avoids us having to screen 10 other people, then that ultimately will pan out to everybody's benefit. Next slide. Now there are deliverables or outcomes that we look for that cut across, and that is the engagement, especially with regulatory agencies, and get them more and given the assurance that we are approaching this in the highest scientific possible way, and that our answers will both be both robust for a real-world setting as well as for showing the value in an interventional trial setting, is something that I think cuts across. The second bullet is also self-explanatory, and that, of course, if you get better connection between clinical phenotypes, biomarker signature, and progression over time, we probably will see better integration in general clinical practice of these biomarkers, and of course also for, as I already said, optimizing our funnel for recruitment into trials. The third bullet, and this goes into the location signatures, overall amyloid density and correlation with them, what is the clinical state, what are the measures that we can identify that have the earliest sign of a cognitive change, is going to be important again to support our understanding of the disease model and the evolution of pre-dementia to dementia. Next slide. One of the things, of course, that's in it is for some of the partners here as well, that these are right now quite invasive and expensive tests. Are they worth the costs? And that this relates to how can you tie knowing or not knowing the status to a different outcome, and also a better outcome for all stakeholders involved. I think having that dialogue, having a strategy built in your plan for engaging the regulatory authorities and the health technology assessors is also going to be key, so that you have a thought, a pathway to when to ask for their advice. It's not going to be if, because that's essential, but when will it fit best, and who all do you want around the table? So having some representation of that in your proposal would also strengthen it considerably. Next slide. And this is, of course, indicative, and it's just the outcome of our brainstorming. So if you think about how to construct the architecture of your proposal, we have come up here with 4 work packages. Of course, you might have other ideas and bring forward a different structure. Just for purpose of this presentation, what we've done is kind of give this structure, and then under each of the work packages talk about what we think we could bring from the FPS side, and then what we think deliverables are that should be proposed by the applying consortium. So it's not rocket science. So work package 1, if you can get the next slide, is around, okay, how do we actually going to manage this project? How they're going to make sure that all the pieces fit. Of course, on the FPS side, given we're used to running large trials globally, we feel we do have some experience on the clinical side with the 2 partners here, Paramel and GE. They bring in the experience of setting up amyloid imaging clinical studies. We are already and have access to, both through public private collaborations already, like ADNI, have access to connections between clinical phenotypes and some imaging data, which of course led to the Clifford-Jack model. But there's within each of the companies, there's some data that can also be contributed. We can bring statistical expertise, and so I'm not going to read each of these, but there is an experience aspect and a resource aspect that FPI can bring. I think on the applicant side, and again, these are just indicative, that's our thinking, you can maybe come up with others, but having a network that already has worked together, of course, would strengthen the contribution in terms of being able to more efficiently set up governance, having the experience of having done these trials, connectivity to existing consortia of relevance. I think that is something that could be a great accelerator to have that. There are a number of them ongoing in Europe, and you can find them on the IMI website. But that, I think, first of all, is essential to be discussed. That why didn't you do that? But certainly, I think there could be quite some efficiency in engaging with what's already been done. Maybe this is a good time now to go to work package 2. So work package 2, so we kind of gave each of these, call it, and sub-studies its own work package. Of course, given that it both entail interaction with subjects, comparison with existing data, follow-up, and then, you know, being able to kind of really evaluate clinically these subjects efficiently, but also have access to the technology, in other words, PET cameras and other imaging or biomarker capabilities would strengthen the applicant's contribution. On the FPA side, our partners here have committed with an indicative number here that they would make their traces available for purposes of these studies, and I think that's good. That's an essential resource to have. Furthermore, the analysis and how that can be done more effectively is also a capability that will be brought from the FPA partners. And then the manufacturing of the tracers and the distribution networks will also come through here. The main difference between work package 2 deliverables for the applicant contribution is that I think experience with real-world evidence data gathering and analysis for the first one here is would be very much of a plus. So your access or knowledge about specific PROs or other ways to characterize, okay, in a real-world setting, not in a clinical office setting, what is the impact of what we are doing, both in a form of management or just knowing the diagnosis point of view. Work package 3 then is about the amyloid imaging enrichment study. Of course, on our side, the batches will be distributed across these 2 studies, but this is then where other FPA companies could come in and in a trial setting, then of course would bring their compounds. On the applicant's contribution side, again, a lot of similarity with part 1, with work package 2, but here experience with proof of concept or adaptive therapeutic interventional trials is, I think, something that would be, if not essential, at least recommended. Maybe then the last work package, and again, these are just an indicative kind of distribution of what we saw as the work. Communication and dissemination. Here I will just highlight the fact that we do feel that a participation of a relevant NGO or patient advocacy group or disease organization would strengthen the link in our ability to kind of really facilitate identification of what are relevant strategies, both in real-world evidence, but also in reach out to get people into these cohorts and follow them over time. I think the aspect of patient engagement has been overlooked a bit too long. Of course, and then working together, initial publication strategy would be necessary, given this is a public-private partnership. Of course, all the data will become public, but our ability to quickly be to show what has been learned is going to be important for the field, not just in Europe, but globally. Next slide. So that's, again, as I said, a tentative or let's say arranging of the work. And of course, if you pay attention to mainly the deliverables, you can of course subdivide it differently if that fits your situation better. Other relevant information, so right now on the industrial consortium side, we have 3 partners, Janssen, Piramal Imaging, and GE Healthcare Life Sciences. There could be others joining depending on, of course, the quality of the proposal. But the numbers that you'll see further down are tied to this particular setup. The indicative duration of action is 60 months. That's kind of typical. We, on the left side of that aisle, will bring resources in kind and cash-wise up to about 12 million euros. Not all of these, both resources, etc., will actually come from within Europe, but there is a distribution key that we will respect. And I'm stressing this is indicative. A little bit I can confirm or not whether the meetings has happened, but that of course could lead to a matching joint undertaking contribution of 12 million euros, so that the total project would be 24 million euros. Next slide. Now, why would you do this? I think for academic researchers on the call, I think having access to batches of PET traces and expertise to deliver large studies will hopefully, I mean, that's the one thing I want to look at, inform how you, moving forward, would treat suspected AD. It would help us in characterizing the large cohorts that have been built, but in the absence of the possibility to have actually an amyloid PET scan. If we build indeed on what exists already, those networks would be further strengthened, and I think that will also improve the position or the ability of Europe to play at a global level. For patients' organizations, I think it should directly affect how both the subjects as well as the caregivers are treated, because you would take out a lot of uncertainty, and we hopefully can get away in a more robust fashion from the public notion of this is part of normal aging by being ability to show the amyloid present in the brain. And then of course also, if the therapeutic intervention endeavor is more successful, that should lead to faster access to effective treatments. And the regulatory agencies, I think, working directly with industry and academia to really, what is the place of amyloid imaging in the context of both therapeutic development, but also clinical use in the wild, so to speak, is something that is of benefit. And I think I just, okay. I think if the next slide, I guess, leads me then to saying we open the floor now to questions.
Thank you very much, Luc, for the presentation. Now, as Luc mentioned, it's time for questions and answers. So just to remind you all how to send in your questions, you can do that in writing by using the question box, typing your text and clicking send. We'll take questions on a first-come, first-served basis and read them aloud for you. You can also ask questions over the phone if you prefer to interact with us directly. Use the yellow hand button in that case, and we will unmute you when it's your turn. So just while we wait for a few questions to come in, it's probably a very good idea to remind all participants that on the 9th of July, so in just 3 days, we will have a rules and procedures webinar where we will have a presentation by the IMI legal manager. And we invite everyone that may have questions about the IMI Call's procedures and rules, especially IP rights, to participate in the webinar. So we have a question coming in by Kun De Vale, who is asking why there are no CSF diagnostic companies involved.
Oh, cool. Maybe you asked that question before that last slide. So the 3 companies involved are Janssen, Piramal, and GE Healthcare.
Oh yes, that's a good point, Luc, because you had it in the slide. Okay, yeah. We are waiting on any other questions to come in. So once again, if you prefer to talk to the speaker or to Elisabetta, you can use the yellow hand button. Otherwise, you can just send in the text. And so once again, for us, it's a very good reminder to ask everyone to contact the IMI program office in case you have questions. Please do not try to contact Luke because this may lead to subsequent problems afterwards. You can call the IMI program office or send us an email, and we will deal with your request within a couple of days maximum. Also, we invite everyone to use the partner search tool, which is reachable from the IMI homepage of the website. That is for you to use keywords in order to find partners that can potentially be interested in applying for the same topic as you are. Frederick Barkov is asking, when will the final call be available? So Frederick, the text, the most up-to-date version of the call text is published on the IMI website. It was just updated at the end of last week. So all the information we now have that are currently validated are included in that page. It's under future topics on the IMI website. We cannot give a definite date now for the launch of the call, the official launch of the call, but we expect this to be imminent and happen in the very next few days. Elisabetta, maybe something else you want to add?
No, I think that's all. So please, I think all the essential information is in the indicative call text, so definitely you can start working on these bases.
We have a very quiet audience today.
Yes, look, you've been extremely clear.
Or don't be shy.
Okay.
We can
well,
probably
I think that I want to then thank Barbara and Alex for making such a clear presentation possible. If the questions have been all answered in the slides themselves, that's right.
Thank you, Luke. And we actually now have a couple of questions coming in. So the first one is from Valentina Brunati asking, what about the deadline indicatively for the application?
So I think that the deadline is the end of September 2015.
Yes, but it's all subject to approval
or
still.
mid-October.
Yeah.
It could be that we will delay to the mid-October.
Yeah, and this is, again, it's very indicative. It's for you to have an idea of how much time you will have to prepare your application, but the only date that you can really rely on is the one that will be mentioned in the final text of the call that will be launched. And we have another question by Jose Luis Molinuevo. He is asking, the AIM-1 objective is related to demonstrate clinical utility when using amyloid PET in our clinical population. However, subjective complainers do not have cognitive impairment by definition and could be considered off-label. Should they be included?
Yeah, thanks, Jose Luis, for that question. This, of course, is an ongoing discussion. We decided to keep it in because part of them, this relates to management, right, and people suspected of or fearful of and all that, and how then the scan rules out or in the actual presence. So I think there is a place in the general management for looking at that particular question in more detail. But it's a good challenge, I think, in terms of the ability to say, okay, these subjects really belong in this sort of cohort or not. But again, you can address that in the proposal also, saying for A, B, C, and D reasons, this is why we suggest not to.
Thank you, Luke. We now have another question by Soraya Valles, who says, all the partners will be together, but who of them will manage the patients with AD? Because we need the central information for all people. And then a follow-up on amyloid biomarkers, which do you think will be the better? And Luke, this was a question to you.
Oh, which would be the better?
Yeah.
I think, well, that's part of, and I think part of for me is also to put a relative kind of receiver operator curve will together for the amyloid imaging and the CSF, if we have many people that have paired samples so that we can have some sort of look. I know they might not be temporarily completely aligned, but so I think that's actually part of the interest I have is can we then, rather than just in models but in real data here, look at that. So that's the answer to the second one. The first one around who will manage the patient, I think it's there's two parts. The inclusion in the cohort is also always related to a PI that has access to the subject, and he will remain responsible for management of the subject. It is just what information does he have access to that might change his approach, right? That's kind of related to part one.
Thank you, Luc. Another question by Sylvain Lehmann, who would like to know if there is a place or a website to propose, to participate, to building a proposal rather than to submit one. So Sylvain, the way the IMI structure works is we have a partner search tool, as mentioned before. You can find a button on the IMI website homepage, and that is for you to find partners. You can also use other tools. There is also a second partner search tool that we recommend. You will receive the link in the thank you email after the webinar, and also we encourage you to activate all your channels and contacts in order to contact relevant partners. You can also do so by contacting fellow webinar participants, thanks to the IMI webinar participant list that we will circulate afterwards. But when you submit your proposal, the proposal will have to be completed. And Elisabetta, maybe there's something else you want to add on this?
No, I think that also you should consider the LinkedIn IMI group. You could start a conversation on or discussion on this.
Thank you. So next question by Emilia Vitale. A good partner could be a site having already a structured group, based on basic research, physicians, and a large cohort. And this is a question. So Luc, I think this is for you.
In short, the answer would be yes. But I think it cannot be a single site for this. So that I would then advise to seek out like sites that have that similar capability.
Next question by Massimiliano Zanin, who is asking, how important is it to present novel data analysis techniques, as for instance coming from data mining and pattern recognition? Or on the contrary, is it better to just propose well-established statistical techniques?
Well, if you can show the advantages in your proposal, I think that could only strengthen it. But I do think part of this is really actually generating not model data, but actual data that flows into models. So the access to a large group of subjects that actually then get the tests done so that they feed a larger disease model. But this is really focused on getting more of the data connected with a clinical phenotype so that we make our models more robust. But if there's, I mean, innovation in analysis methods is of course something we should always look at.
Thank you, Luc. Another question by Frederic Bakoff, who's asking, Roche seems not included. However, their CSF test holds great promise. Is that a problem?
No, I think that's a potential opportunity to say we can bring them with us is a strength with that strengthen, and if they are willing to provide in kind, they can become partners.
Jose Luis Peris is asking, could it be feasible to use a brain-dedicated PET in the project to compare its performance with that of whole-body PETs?
Okay, I will pass that on to Alex or Barbara, as they are the PET experts. But and they might be on mute.
Yeah. Let me just check. Alex or Barbara, if you could unmute your phones, and I see you are unmuted from here, so we should be able to hear you.
thing. Could you just repeat the question, please? Sorry for that.
Yeah, no problem. So I'll repeat the question, and then Luke, of course, please feel free to add any details. Jose Luis Perez was asking, could it be feasible to use a brain-dedicated PET in the project to compare its performance with that of the whole-body PETs?
So the question is, I need a bit more clarification about the question, because I don't know what the purpose would be to do a whole-body PET in the patients with brain amyloidosis or suspected brain amyloidosis. So could you probably not thinking right now here, so could you just provide a bit more explanation why you're asking about a whole-body PET?
What I can do, Barbara, is I can unmute Jose Luis. Jose Luis, you should be unmuted in case you're happy to follow up and explain your questions in more details. Hello, Jose? Hello. I'm afraid this is not going to work at the moment, but maybe we can.
You know, I'm happy to share my email or something, or if you have some contact details, I'm happy to give you a call and
also could write a mail to us.
Yeah, what we will do, Barbara, is we will ask Jose in case to contact Elisabetta here, and then if needed, she will get in touch with you. Let me see, because we have more questions still. Yes, so I see that Emilia Vitale wanted to ask some more details. Let me see if I can unmute her and if we can hear her. Emilia, you should be able to hear us now. Can you try and speak so that we can check if you're okay?
Let's see. Can you hear me?
It works. Yes, please go ahead.
My question is regarding, let's say that I have already a formed group of people that working with me, like a clinician, and I'm a basic research, and I have a large cohort of patients. So if I can, I'm wondering if this already organized side can be appealing for an industry, and participating not as a site, single site, but as a partner with the large consortium. Enter like, I don't know if if I made it clear. Enter with all this group within the consortium.
I don't know, Luke, you want to answer? Maybe I can also answer. I mean,
yeah, why don't you go ahead, Elisabetta, first?
Yes, okay. So if you have already a team of partner, of course, each of these partners will have to be one applicant of your consortium. So of course, you have to think if you have in all the team already all the expertise that is necessary, as well as all the necessary characteristics from the point of view of eligibility.
No, I believe, you know, I don't want to enter as a consortium myself, but enter as a partner in a large consortium.
Oh, then I think, Emilia, then it's time for you to start networking with who do you think would also be good, and start building that broader network, right? Or talk to individuals that you know already are in a broader network.
Okay.
Yeah, I would, yeah. For this, please consider very carefully, read very carefully also what is written in the topic text in the synergy section.
Thank you, Emilia, and thank you both, Luke and Elisabetta, for the answers. We have another question by Soraya Valles. She is asking if, in the call, is it possible to add brain research with human brain bank?
Well, I think if it goes into kind of, well, in a brain bank, of course, then you talk about, then of course you have the 100% diagnosis, and if your question then is, can we include retrospective data in here, I'd say this is all about collecting prospectively data. So I think it's more about access to live subjects.
Thank you, Luke. Another question. Soraya also wanted to know, what do you mean about natural history of amyloid? Just to clarify a little bit the definition.
Well, we could think about doing more than that. There could be sequential PET scans for one. One when a subject is introduced in a cohort, a second one when he or she might be included in either a therapeutic intervention trial or a real-world evidence experiment. And then you would have some trajectory over time. And if you then aggregate across subjects and start correlating their clinical condition with their scans, we, I think, are further contributing to a picture of how does amyloid in the brain really evolve over time. I don't know if Alex and or Barbara, you want to add to that.
Not from my side. I think you explained it perfectly well. It's really longitudinal data and looking at rate of accumulation. And the question then is, of course, what type of treatment intervention is there to change that course? There's relatively a lot of data out already on the rate of accumulation in MCI subjects in AD, as well as in persons with Down syndrome. So the issue is probably going to be on what type of intervention is there to change that rate.
Thank you both. Next question is from Mada Mehdi, who is complimenting you with the presentation. He's also asking, this IMI call, as the title suggests, gives the impression that all kinds of biomarkers are welcome. Besides PET, why don't you encourage other CSF or blood-based biomarkers? Why the emphasis is only on imaging or PET-based BMS?
Yeah, so this is actually more of an economical question in a way, and it relates to our prior question about, Roche being in or out. Of course, having multimodal comparison capability would be greatly strengthening this, but we were working with what we could bring up as a resource on our end, and then how that could be. So if there's through the consortium, the applicants, an influx of an additional capability, whether it's a CSF one or otherwise, that would allow us to do multimodal comparisons, that only strengthens it, but it does have to come then with its own in-kind contribution, because right now that's not in our quote-unquote indicative budget.
Thank you, Luke. Another question by Alessandra Bertoldo regarding PET data. Are you thinking that only as few of our semi-quantitative approaches have to be used? Are you considering also reference tissue modeling or other more advanced modeling approaches?
That's definitely one for Alex or Barbara, but Alex seems to be not able to get live sound. He hears everything, but he cannot speak apparently. Let's see.
Yeah, I tried to contact him as well. Yeah, let's see. Barbara, maybe can you help in the meantime?
Yeah, sure. At this stage, there are a lot of opportunities in how to handle and model the data. So the project is not fully fleshed out, and yes, we will look at various different ways of analyzing data, of looking at longitudinal data, of looking at different reference regions. That's a given, but again, it's at this point not fleshed out, so it will be fleshed out down the road. So we are very welcoming any sort of specific suggestion you may provide, so please feel free to do that.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm just trying to see if I can get Alex to come back on the line. I think there may be a slight connection problem in that respect. So maybe, Alex, if you want to try and come back, I would suggest you hang up and dial in again. Otherwise, you could just... Oh, yes, I can. Absolutely, yes. Great, thank you.
Something came through. No, just to add to what Barbara said, yes, I mean, obviously there are a number of potential ways to analyze the PET data. And we would be interested to hear from potential applicants on ways of doing that.
Thank you, Alex. Last question we have for the moment is from Friedrich Barkov, who is asking, for the cohort study, follow-up beyond the 5-year period would be of interest. How do you see future steps beyond this call?
Hey, Frederick. It's a very good one, and we should have put it in. But in general, for IMI projects, there is also the question around how can we ensure, or can you ensure sustainability, so that your ability to answer scientific question is not dependent just on IMI flow. So I think putting in some ideas around how you would be able to sustain this work beyond the 60 months would be very welcome.
Thank you, Luke, for this. So unless there is any other questions, I think we have come to the end of the webinar. This is a very nice ending jingle. I bet it was someone's phone. It's okay, it's okay. And so I don't know, Luke, is there any other message that you would like to share with potential applicants today?
No, other than to say that, of course, these applications will be reviewed by an independent panel. But after that, I hope to then see what's been submitted and really kind of learn from that, as well as see how the way we framed it was helpful to the applicants. I do think and believe strongly that creating this bigger data set connecting the clinic with amyloid imaging is going to be very valuable, either in a treatment or trial setting. So I'm really looking forward to getting robust proposals back.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you, everyone, for participating today in the webinar. Thank you, Luke, Barbara, Alex, and Elisabetta also for following this topic. If you have any questions, we would like to remind you to use the IMI info desk email address, as you can see now here. I am sorry, I have some troubles in getting the last slide on. Anyway, the email address is infodesk@imi.europa.eu. Also, feel free to call the IMI program office in case you have any questions and you would like to speak with Elisabetta or with anyone else. I also invite all potential applicants to participate in the 9th of July webinar on IMI rules and procedures. And for anything else, just feel free to contact us anytime. So thank you once again, everyone, and good luck for your application. Thank you. And